The lantern hissed when Daniel Morrow struck the match, smoke curling like a warning before the light caught. He stepped into the barn, boots crunching on straw. He expected the restless shifting of his horses, maybe the squeak of mice. Instead, the light spilled over something else, someone else. A girl. She was curled near the feed sacks, dirt smeared into her skin like it had been pressed there by the earth itself. Her dress was torn, her lips split and trembling. Wide eyes caught the light and fixed on him, wild and raw, and before he could speak she whispered, hoarse, shaking, "I'm not safe here." The words didn't sound like a plea, they sounded like a truth already proven. Daniel froze, one hand on the lantern, the other drifting toward the Colt at his belt, though he didn't draw it. A part of him wanted to turn and leave, to believe she was a trick of shadows or whiskey, but she was too solid for that. A girl, maybe 17, and she looked like she'd clawed her way through hell. The ranch had been silent when he rode in, silent the way it had been since Mary and the boy were put in the ground, 3 winters back. He'd built his life out of that silence, out of cattle, fences, whiskey, and work, enough to keep the past buried. Tonight was supposed to be no different. But now, there was this girl in his barn. Daniel crouched slowly, setting the lantern down so its light wouldn't blind her. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Her eyes darted past him to the door, as if expecting someone to follow. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she pressed her hand against her ribs and whispered again, almost breaking on the words, "Don't let them find me." The lantern flame sputtered in the draft. For a moment, Daniel thought he heard it too. Boots on gravel, the faint creak of leather in the night air. He stiffened, holding still, listening, nothing. Only the restless stomp of a horse shifting in its stall. He turned back to her, heart thudding, questions already clawing their way to his tongue. Who was chasing her? Why here? His barn of all places. And what did she mean by not safe? Before he could ask, a noise split the night. Not inside the barn, outside. A slow, deliberate knock at the ranch house door. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. The girl flinched, curling tighter against the hay. The lantern hissed, the silence after the knock heavy enough to choke on. The knock came again, firmer this time, 3 beats against the door of the ranch house. Not frantic, not neighborly either, the kind of knock a man used when he already knew he'd be answered. Daniel straightened, jaw tight. The girl's breath rattled behind him, shallow, quick. She shook her head, eyes wide, whispering, "Please, don't let them know I'm here." He felt the weight of his Colt at his hip, the weight of the years he'd spent avoiding trouble. He didn't owe her a thing, didn't even know her name, but something in the way she said safe, like she'd never tasted the word, struck against an old ache he thought he'd buried with his boy. Another knock, louder now. Daniel whispered, "Stay quiet," then pulled the barn door shut behind him. The cold night bit his face as he crossed the yard, boots crunching frost. His ranch house loomed, dark except for the thin yellow slit of lantern light through the window. Whoever stood on the porch had been waiting. He slid the door latch, every instinct telling him not to, but he opened it anyway. 2 men stood there, both strangers, dusty coats, wide hats shadowing their faces. One had a badge pinned crooked to his vest, though it didn't look polished enough to belong to law that mattered. The other leaned on a rifle like it was part of his arm. "Evening," the badged one said, voice smooth but sharp underneath. "We're tracking someone. Young woman. Might have run this way." Daniel kept his face flat, the way a man does when poker turns ugly. "Ain't seen anybody." The man studied him, lips curling like he half expected the lie. "She's dangerous. Best if we find her quick. You keep your eyes open, you let us know." Daniel didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of the porch boards under the men's boots. Finally he said, "If she's dangerous, why is she running barefoot in the cold?" The rifleman stiffened, but the badge only smiled, thin and humorless. "Because wolves will call themselves lambs if it gets 'em a bed for the night." He tipped his hat. "Reckon we'll search the area." When they turned, Daniel shut the door, heart pounding. He leaned against it, staring into the black of his parlor. He could let them look, could let them drag her away and be done. Instead, he crossed the yard back to the barn. The girl was where he'd left her, eyes red and pleading. "What did you do?" he asked, voice low, rough. She whispered one line that made his stomach knot. "I didn't kill him, but they think I did. They'll come back." The girl's whisper clung to the rafters of the barn like smoke that wouldn't clear. Daniel crouched in front of her, lantern casting long, restless shadows across the stalls. He could hear the horses shifting, uneasy as if they felt the storm rolling closer. "Then you better start talking," he said. Her fingers dug into the hay, knuckles white. "They think I killed him, but I didn't. I swear it. He fell. They wouldn't believe me. They never do." Daniel studied her, the same way he had studied a steer before deciding if it was worth keeping alive through winter. She was young, worn down, but there was steel somewhere behind her terror. Whoever they were, they wanted her bad enough to ride through the night. That meant danger wasn't on its way. It was already here. A sudden noise cracked the silence. Not a knock this time. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, crunching across the frostbitten earth. Daniel set the lantern down, hand drifting to the revolver on his hip. He moved to the barn door and eased it open just enough to see. Out there, maybe 50 yards off, 3 riders sat their horses at the edge of his fence line. Moonlight painted their outlines silver. They weren't moving closer, not yet, just waiting, watching. The girl sucked in a breath behind him. That's them. Daniel shut the door softly, turned, and for the first time in years felt the weight of choice press on his chest. He could walk her out right now, hand her over, wash his hands of it. A widow rancher living alone wasn't the kind of man anyone expected to take sides. No one would fault him. But then she looked at him, like a hunted thing, cornered and shaking, with nothing but one last prayer in her eyes. Outside, the riders shifted. One of them called out across the night, voice carrying like a crow's caw. "Bring her out, rancher! Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words were cold, practiced, the kind used when a man already believed the outcome. Daniel didn't answer. His silence stretched, heavy, until even the girl seemed afraid of it. Finally, he turned back to her. "You need to tell me everything, now." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "If I do, you'll hate me too." A fist pounded on the barn door. The horses reared. Dust shivered from the rafters. The night had closed in. The pounding at the barn door finally stopped, leaving only the echo of hooves shifting in the dirt outside. The silence after was worse than the noise, like the riders were just settling in, waiting for him to break. Inside, Daniel lit another lantern and set it on the stall rail. The light softened the shadows, but it didn't ease the tension. The girl sat slumped against the hay, arms wrapped tight around herself, her breathing shallow as though every sound risked her life. Daniel crouched again, his voice rough but quieter now. "You said they think you killed a man. Who was he?" Her eyes glistened, reflecting the lantern flame. "The rancher I worked for, Mr. Kellen. He drank, bad. Nights, he'd—" She broke off, her throat tightening. "He came at me. I shoved him back. He fell, hit the hearthstone. I ran before they could say it was murder." Daniel stared at her, the memory of his Mary ghosting the space between them. Mary's soft laugh, Mary's bruised wrist that one winter when a drifter had gotten too bold before Daniel put him in the ground. The girl's words cut deeper than he wanted them to. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. Her gaze dropped to the dirt floor. "Didn't mean to. I just kept running till my legs gave out. Saw your barn. Thought maybe—" She didn't finish. Maybe what? That he'd be kinder than the men outside? That he'd see her as something other than a body to be owned or punished? The air hung heavy. Daniel reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small, worn photograph. The edges were frayed, the image faded. Mary, smiling with their boy in her lap. He hadn't shown it to anyone in years. Without words, he held it out. The girl's hands trembled as she took it. She stared, lips parting, her expression softening for the first time since he'd found her. "Your family?" Daniel gave a single nod. "They look safe," she whispered. The word struck him harder than the rider's threats outside. Safe. A thing he hadn't thought about in years. A thing she had probably never known. For a long moment, the only sound was the horses breathing, the night pressing close around the barn. Then came a voice outside, low and sharp. "We'll burn him out if we have to." The girl's eyes snapped to his, panic raw. Daniel slid the photograph back into his coat, the decision forming hard in his chest. He wasn't handing her over. The smell of kerosene hit Daniel before the sound. Out beyond the barn walls, a bottle shattered, liquid splashing into dirt, then the scrape of a match. Voices murmured. Laughter, low, mean, certain. Daniel rose, revolver already in hand. The girl's fingers clutched his coat sleeve. "Please," she whispered, voice raw. Don't let them take me. He looked down at her, the lantern light catching her face. She was trembling, not just from fear, but from the memory of all the nights that had led here. He thought of Mary, of his boy, of all the ways silence had carved him hollow. He could not be silent now. He opened the barn door wide. The riders jerked their heads up, surprised by the sudden flare of lantern light. Daniel stepped out slow, revolver steady, the girl's shadow lingering behind him. "Put that fire down," he called, voice carrying across the yard. The man with the badge sneered. "You're making a mistake, rancher. That girl's filth. She killed a decent man." Daniel's jaw worked, years of grief grinding against the weight of choice. A decent man don't leave a girl bruised and begging for mercy, and a badge don't make you law. For a moment, the night held still. The riders shifted, anger rippling. The rifleman raised his weapon an inch higher. Daniel cocked the Colt. The sound cracked like thunder. "I buried my wife and son out here," he said, his voice low, trembling with fury and sorrow. "Ain't got much left worth fighting for. But tonight I'll fight." The silence broke. The rifleman's horse shied, stamping. The badge muttered a curse, realizing the standoff would cost more blood than they'd planned to spill. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "She ain't worth it," he snarled. "Let's ride." One by one, the riders turned, their silhouettes shrinking against the pale horizon, until the sound of hooves faded into nothing. Daniel lowered the revolver, his breath shaking as though it might break him. Slowly he turned back toward the barn. The girl stood framed in lantern light, her face streaked with tears she hadn't let fall until now. "They'll come again," she said softly. "Maybe," Daniel answered. He holstered the Colt, the decision sitting heavy but steady in his chest. "But not tonight. Tonight you're safe." She blinked, as if she'd never believed the word could be true. Later, when dawn broke over the frost and the cattle stirred in the pasture, Daniel led her toward the house. Neither spoke. The land was quiet again, but not empty. Never empty, not anymore. Years later, folks would say they saw a girl at the Morrow Ranch who came from nowhere, who carried a scarred past and found shelter where no one thought she would. But in that first morning light, it was only this: a rancher who had nothing left, and a girl who had never been safe, finding, at last, a reason to breathe.